Isabella sat alone in her modest living room, cradling her baby bump. The soft hum of the afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room, comforting yet isolating. Her eyes wandered to the peeling paint on the walls, a stark reminder of the years that had slipped by since Gustavo, her husband, had stormed out of their lives. It felt like a lifetime ago, though the memories remained sharp, etched into her mind like an unwelcome tattoo. As she gently traced her fingers over her belly, she couldn't help but be swept away by memories of their passionate love story. They had been young and reckless, full of dreams for the future. She could still hear the echoes of their laughter and almost feel the warmth of his embrace. But that warmth had long since turned to icy despair on the day he left. "How could he do this to me?" she whispered, a question that had haunted her ever since. "Mommy!" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see her 3-year-old son, Ethan, standing at the doorway, his big brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you okay, Mommy?" he asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about some things." Ethan toddled over to her, his little feet making soft taps against the wooden floor. He climbed onto the couch and leaned his head against her side. A rush of warmth filled Isabella's heart. This child, her child, was the reason she had survived the darkest days of loneliness and confusion. She kissed the top of his head, inhaling the sweet scent of his shampoo. "Can we play dinosaurs?" Ethan asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Of course. Let me grab them," she said, rising from the couch with a small grunt. As she walked to the shelf, her mind drifted to the day Gustavo left. It had been a stormy morning, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the turmoil in her heart. The tension in the house had been unbearable, culminating in an argument about everything and nothing. Isabella could still remember the stormy look on Gustavo's face moments before he walked out. "Gustavo, please don't go," she had pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. "We can work this out. I'm pregnant. We have to think about the baby." He had stood at the door, jaw clenched, his eyes filled with a confusing mix of anger and fear. "I can't do this, Isabella. I'm not ready to be a father. Not now." And just like that, he was gone. She had stood frozen in the doorway, watching helplessly as he drove away, the weight of his words crashing over her. The realization that she would face motherhood alone settled in her chest like a stone. The flashback faded as Ethan's voice called her back to the present. "Mommy, look, I found the T-Rex," he exclaimed, proudly holding up a bright green dinosaur. "Great job, buddy," she said, her heart swelling with pride. "Now let's set up the dinosaurs for a big adventure." As they played, Isabella tried to focus on Ethan's laughter, the way his eyes lit up with joy as the dinosaurs clashed in an imaginary world. But even in this moment of happiness, a shadow lingered in her heart. The absence of a father was a void that no amount of love or laughter could fill. Every roar from the plastic dinosaurs seemed like a reminder of what could have been. Hey everyone! If you enjoy watching our videos, help us by subscribing to our channel. It's really important, and that way you support us. Now, let's get into the video. 3 years had passed since that fateful day, and Isabella had worked hard to rebuild her life for herself and Ethan. She had thrown herself into freelance graphic design, finding solace in her work. Late nights spent at her computer were an escape from the loneliness that often crept in, even in the comfort of their small apartment. "Mommy, I want the green one to win," Ethan shouted, sliding the toy dinosaur across the play mat. "All right, the green one is the hero," she laughed, joining in his excitement. "But what will he do when the fire-breathing dragon shows up?" Ethan gasped dramatically. "He will use his superpowers and fly away." They both giggled, lost in their game. Yet, beneath the joy, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that change was on the horizon. Life had a way of throwing curveballs, and she had learned to be wary. Outside, the world buzzed with the noise of life, but inside their small apartment, it felt like a sanctuary, a refuge from the heartbreak that had once shattered her world. That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Isabella sat on the couch, staring at her laptop. The glow of the screen cast a soft light on her worried face. She had worked tirelessly to build a stable, loving environment for her son. But the shadows of her past still lingered, refusing to release their grip. Maybe it's time to let go, she thought, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Maybe I need to move on. But how? How could she forgive the man who had abandoned her at the most vulnerable moment of her life? Just thinking about Gustavo sent a cold shiver down her spine. She had followed his rise to success from afar. A millionaire now, living a life that seemed worlds away from her own. A sudden noise outside broke her train of thought, the distinct rumble of a car engine. Isabella stood, her heart racing. The sound was unmistakable. She rushed to the window, hoping she was wrong. Through the glass, she saw a sleek black car pull up in front of their building. A familiar silhouette emerged, and her heart sank. It was Gustavo. "What is he doing here?" she whispered, panic rising in her chest. The years of pain and betrayal surged back, threatening to overwhelm her. She wanted to run, to shield Ethan from whatever storm was about to descend upon them. But there was no escape. She knew that. She would have to face him, the man who had broken her heart and left her to navigate motherhood alone. Taking a deep breath, Isabella steeled herself. She would not let fear dictate her actions. It was time to confront the past, no matter how painful. As she turned away from the window, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and anticipation. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning, and she could only hope that it would lead to healing, for herself and for Ethan. The sleek lines of the furniture and the expansive view of the city below reflected his success. But inside, Gustavo felt an overwhelming emptiness. His gaze lingered on the framed photograph resting on his desk. Isabella, radiant and full of life, beaming alongside a toddler with big brown eyes that mirrored his own. Ethan, the boy he had never met, yet who had taken root in his heart the moment he learned of his existence. Gustavo sighed deeply, running a hand through his tousled hair. The weight of regret pressed heavily on his chest. Leaning back in the leather chair, memories flooded his mind. Laughter, warmth, and the bond he once believed would never break. The day he left felt like a distant lifetime, but the consequences of that choice echoed painfully in his conscience. The ache of lost time gnawed at him, urging him to make amends, to reconnect with the woman he had loved and the son he had never held. Resolute, Gustavo grabbed his coat and headed out. The bustling streets of the city blurred as he drove toward Isabella's modest apartment. The journey felt interminable, his mind racing with rehearsed words, each syllable laced with anxiety and hope. Would she welcome him back? Would she allow him to meet Ethan? As he pulled up in front of her building, he took a moment to compose himself. A deep breath steadied his racing heart. This was it. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, nerves tingling with every step. At her door, his hand hovered over the doorbell. What if she slams the door in my face? What if she never wants to see me again? But the thought of never knowing his son urged him forward. He pressed the button, the chime echoing down the hallway. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Isabella. She looked different yet achingly familiar. Her hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes widening in disbelief. For a moment, they stood frozen, the world fading as memories filled the air between them. "Gustavo," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Isabella." He struggled to find the right words, his heart pounding. "I'm sorry for showing up like this. I just needed to see you." And Ethan? Her expression shifted, a swirl of emotions flickering across her face. "Ethan isn't here right now," she said guardedly. "What do you want, Gustavo?" "I want to be a part of his life," he said, his voice softening. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to be there for both of you. I haven't stopped thinking about you. Or him." A flicker of vulnerability crossed her features, but it was quickly masked with resolve. "You left, Gustavo. You made that choice." Her voice was steady, though he could sense the turmoil beneath. "What makes you think you can just come back now?" "I know I can't change the past," he replied, the desperation seeping into his tone. "But I've changed. I've built a life, and I want to share it with you and Ethan. I want to make things right." She lowered her gaze, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. After a moment, she whispered. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be fine. Ethan has a life now. I've worked hard to give him that. I don't want to disrupt your lives, Gustavo pleaded, stepping closer. I just want a chance to be his father. Isabella sighed, her defenses faltering. And what if he doesn't want to know you? What if he's happy the way things are? Gustavo's heart sank at the thought, but he pressed on. I'll do whatever it takes. Just let me meet him, please. After what felt like an eternity, Isabella gave a small, reluctant nod. Okay, but I'm not making any promises. Ethan comes first. Always. Of course, he said, relief washing over him. I won't let you down this time. She stepped aside to let him in, and Gustavo took a deep breath as he crossed the threshold into the apartment that had once been his home. Memories washed over him. Faint echoes of laughter, the scent of her cooking, the warmth of their love. But now the space felt different, charged with tension and unresolved emotions. Ethan's at a playdate, Isabella said, motioning for him to sit. He'll be back in about an hour. Okay, Gustavo replied, trying to hide his nerves. What does he like to do? I want to know everything about him. Isabella hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. He loves dinosaurs and drawing. He's quite the artist for a 3-year-old. A hint of pride crept into her voice, and it warmed Gustavo's heart. Just like his mom, he said with a small smile. I remember how you used to fill sketchbooks with your designs. Things change, she said curtly, her gaze shifting toward the window. The distance between them felt like a chasm carved by time and hurt. Gustavo's voice softened. I wish I could undo what I did. Leaving you, leaving him. I thought it was for the best, but I was wrong. Wrong doesn't even begin to cover it, she snapped, her voice rising. You walked away, Gustavo. You left me to do this alone. I know, he said, remorse heavy in his chest. I can't change the past, but I want to be here now, for both of you. Let me help. Isabella studied him for a moment, her expression softening just a fraction. It's not that simple. I've built a life without you. Ethan's life isn't about you. Or me. It's about him. Then let me be part of that life, Gustavo said quietly. Let me be his father. Maybe, she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of hope and doubt. But trust takes time, Gustavo. It won't happen overnight. I'll do whatever it takes, he promised, his heart pounding with determination. Just then, the doors swung open, and a tiny whirlwind of energy burst into the room. Mommy, I'm back. Ethan's laughter filled the apartment, his bright eyes sparkling with joy. Isabella knelt to embrace him, her face lighting up with a smile that melted Gustavo's heart. Hey, buddy, did you have fun? Yeah, we played dinosaurs, Ethan exclaimed, his excitement contagious. Then he noticed the unfamiliar man standing in the corner. Who's that? Gustavo's breath caught in his throat. This is the moment. He struggled for the words. I'm your dad, Ethan. I've come to see you. The boy tilted his head, his brow furrowing in confusion. Dad? He echoed softly. But I thought you were my dad, Mommy. Isabella bit her lip, her heart racing as she exchanged a glance with Gustavo. She knelt down beside her son, brushing a hand gently over his curls. Ethan, this is your dad, Gustavo. He's come to spend time with us. Ethan's expression shifted, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Can I show you my drawings? He asked, his innocent enthusiasm slicing through the tension like a knife. Of course, Gustavo replied, his heart swelling with pride as he knelt to meet Ethan's gaze. I'd love to see them. Ethan rushed off to grab his artwork, his energy radiating with unbridled joy. Gustavo marveled at the boy's liveliness, the way he moved so freely, unburdened by the complexities that weighed down the adults around him. From a short distance, Isabella watched them interact, her emotions tangled in a web of hope and fear. Could this really be the start of something new? Or was it just a fleeting dream, destined to disappear? For the first time in years, a flicker of hope sparked within her. Yet even as she watched Gustavo engage with Ethan, a part of her remained cautious. The path forward was uncertain, clouded by the shadows of their past. Still, Perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way forward together. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, its golden rays bathed the playground in a warm glow. Isabella sat quietly on a park bench, her eyes fixed on Ethan as he ran across the playground, his laughter filling the air. The sight of her son, carefree and brimming with joy, filled her heart with warmth. But it was quickly followed by a pang of realization. Ethan was so much like Gustavo. The same tousled dark hair blowing in the breeze, the same mischievous grin whenever excitement lit up his face. These were traits he had inherited from the man who had once been everything to her. "Mom, look at me," Ethan shouted, stretching his arms wide as he swung high on the swing, kicking his legs with pure abandon. Isabella smiled, though her heart ached with a mix of longing and fear. Could they ever be a family again? Memories of the lonely years she had endured flooded her mind. The hardships of raising Ethan alone and the small victories that had shaped her into the strong woman she had become. And now, with Gustavo back, a fragile hope flickered within her. A hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what was lost. "Hey, buddy, don't swing too high," she called out, forcing herself to focus on the present and not the swirling thoughts in her mind. Still, the vision of a happy family, her, Gustavo, and Ethan together, danced persistently in her imagination. Back at the apartment that evening, Isabella sat on the couch, watching Ethan tear open a new toy with uncontainable excitement. Gustavo, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him, beamed as he watched their son, his joy as infectious as Ethan's. But Isabella's heart remained heavy. "Is this too much?" she asked quietly, moving closer to Gustavo. Concern edged her voice. "I mean, he's still adjusting to having you back. I don't want him to feel overwhelmed." Gustavo looked up, surprised but understanding. "I just want to show him I care," he said earnestly, his voice soft. "I know I messed up, Isabella. I'm trying to make it right." She studied him, searching for signs of the man she had once loved. There was sincerity in his gaze, but the scars from the past still ran deep. "I appreciate that, Gustavo," she said, her voice steady, "but we have to take things slow. He needs to know we're here to stay, that we're not going anywhere." Gustavo nodded, his expression softening. "Of course, I'll do whatever it takes." Later, after Ethan had drifted off to sleep, Isabella found herself standing in the kitchen, brewing a cup of tea. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Gustavo was attentive, charming, and as familiar as he had been in the early days of their relationship. But the question that gnawed at her was whether she could trust him again. "Isabella?" Gustavo's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood leaning against the doorframe, his expression tentative. "Can we talk?" She set her mug down and wiped her hands on a dish towel. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Gustavo hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. "I know it's been a long time, and I know I hurt you. I can't undo the past, but I want you to know that I'm here now, for both of you. I've missed so much." Isabella's heart tightened, her pulse quickening. "It's not that simple, Gustavo. You left, without a word. I had to pick up the pieces on my own. It wasn't easy. I can only imagine," he said, taking a small step closer. "But I'm here now. I want to be part of your lives again. I want to make things right." Her heart fluttered at his words, stirring long-buried emotions. But she reminded herself of the pain that had followed his departure. "It's not just about you being here, Gustavo," she said firmly. "It's about what's best for Ethan. He needs stability. He needs to know he can trust you." "I'll prove it to you," he said, almost pleading. "Just give me a chance." Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed on the countertop. She glanced down and saw a message from Lisa, her best friend. "Just checking in. How are you holding up?" "Excuse me," Isabella said softly, holding up the phone. "I need to take this." "Sure," Gustavo replied, a hint of disappointment in his voice as she stepped outside for some fresh air. "Hey, Lisa," Isabella said, answering the call as she leaned against the balcony railing. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. How are things with Gustavo?" Lisa's voice was warm, but there was a note of concern. Isabella sighed, trying to find the right words. It's complicated. He's trying to be part of Ethan's life, but I'm not sure I can trust him again. Is he still the same guy who left you? Lisa asked gently. It's great that he wants to be involved, but you have to protect yourself. And Ethan, I know, Isabella whispered, rubbing her temple. But I keep seeing glimpses of the man I fell in love with, and it's confusing. I want to believe he's changed. Just be careful, I say, Lisa cautioned. You don't want to reopen old wounds. Think about what you really want, not just what he wants. I will, Isabella promised, though doubt still lingered in her heart. Thanks for checking in, Lisa. I really appreciate it. After ending the call, Isabella took a moment to gaze at the stars scattered across the night sky. The air was heavy with unmade decisions, possibilities, and fears. When she re-entered the apartment, she found Gustavo sitting quietly on the floor, gazing at a framed photo of Ethan on the wall. Everything okay? He asked, looking up as she entered. Yeah, she replied, forcing a small smile. Just talking to Lisa. Gustavo nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. She's a good friend. You're lucky to have someone like her. Yes, I am, Isabella agreed, gratitude warming her heart. Lisa's been there for me through everything. A comfortable silence fell between them, though the tension was palpable, like a delicate thread stretched too thin. It felt as though they were both tiptoeing around unspoken words, reluctant to disturb the fragile peace that had settled between them. Isabella, Gustavo finally broke the silence, his voice low and measured. I want to be part of Ethan's life, but I also want to be part of yours. Isabella's heart skipped a beat as his words lingered in the air. She longed for connection, for the love they had once shared, but the weight of betrayal sat heavy on her chest. I'm not sure what that looks like, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Then let's take it one step at a time, he suggested, his gaze locked onto hers. For now, let's focus on Ethan. We can figure out the rest later. Isabella nodded slowly, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. Maybe this was the right path, for Ethan's sake, at least. They could co-parent, be civil, but as she caught the glimmer of hope in Gustavo's expression, she couldn't help but wonder if there was still a chance for more, or if the scars of the past would keep them forever apart. Okay, she whispered. Let's try. Gustavo smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. Thank you, Isabella. I won't let you down this time. Later that evening, the cozy apartment filled with the mouth-watering aroma of roasted chicken, the scent of rosemary and garlic mingling with the soft flicker of candlelight. Isabella had set the table with care, the mismatched plates and silverware collected over the years, each holding its own story. The warm glow of the candles contrasted sharply with the tension that lingered just beneath the surface. Gustavo sat across from her, his hands clasped together as he glanced at Ethan, who was busy coloring in his sketchbook. The boy's quiet laughter echoed in the background, a sound that both comforted and unsettled Isabella. She wanted this evening to be perfect, a chance to rebuild the connection between them, but the shadows of the past loomed over every word left unspoken. How was your day? Isabella asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Good, Gustavo replied, though his voice lacked the enthusiasm she hoped for. Just the usual, meetings, phone calls. You know how it is. Isabella gave a polite nod, forcing a small smile. She wanted to ask about his life, about the women he had dated during their time apart, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she focused on serving the golden brown chicken, the candlelight reflecting off its crispy skin. At first, their conversation was light, revolving around mundane topics. Ethan's school projects, Isabella's latest design work, and the weather. But after a few sips of wine, Gustavo shifted the tone. I've been thinking a lot about my past lately, he said, his gaze drifting toward the window. Isabella's heart clenched. What do you mean? She asked cautiously, keeping her tone even. Gustavo hesitated, then continued. Before I left, I was distracted, caught up in work, chasing things that didn't really matter. He exhaled deeply. I dated women who, they weren't important. I think I was just running. From everything, running? Isabella repeated, her fork clinking against her plate. Her composure began to slip. You left, Gustavo. You walked away from everything we built. Gustavo's jaw tightened briefly, a flicker of defensiveness crossing his face. I know. I didn't realize what I was throwing away. His voice softened as he met her gaze. I want to be better, for you and for Ethan. Do you? Isabella's voice rose slightly, her frustration bubbling to the surface. You think a few dinners and gifts can erase the pain you caused? And telling me about your past relationships, how is that supposed to make things better? Gustavo opened his mouth to respond, but Ethan's small voice cut through the tension like a knife. Mom, why are you and Dad arguing? He asked, his wide eyes flicking between them. Isabella's heart sank. She knelt beside Ethan's chair, smoothing his hair with a gentle hand. We're not arguing, sweetheart. We're just talking, okay? Ethan nodded, though his little brow furrowed with confusion. Can we play a game after dinner? Of course, Isabella replied, offering him a warm smile. Gustavo cleared his throat, making an effort to lighten the mood. What game do you want to play, buddy? I bet I can beat both of you. Ethan's face brightened. Uno. I'm the best at it. Challenge accepted. Gustavo grinned, the tension in the room easing slightly. But just as the fragile peace began to settle, the sharp ring of Gustavo's phone shattered the moment. He glanced at the caller ID, his expression darkening. Excuse me, he said, standing abruptly and stepping into the next room. Isabella's chest tightened with unease as she cleared the plates, her mind racing. What if it's another woman? What if his past is already creeping back into their lives? When Gustavo returned, his face was pale, the color drained from his cheeks. I need to take this, he said, his voice tight. Who was it? Isabella asked, her heart pounding. A woman, he answered, casting a quick glance toward Ethan, who had resumed his coloring. She says she has information about Ethan. Isabella's stomach churned. What kind of information? I don't know yet, Gustavo admitted, his voice low, but it sounded serious. We need to talk to her. Talk to her. Isabella's voice wavered with disbelief. What does she have to do with us? With Ethan? I don't know, Isabella. Gustavo snapped, frustration flashing across his face. But we can't ignore it. If it's important, we need to find out. Ethan looked up from his sketchbook again, his innocent eyes clouded with confusion. Mom, why are you mad? Isabella knelt beside him once more, forcing a smile she didn't feel. I'm not mad, sweetheart. Everything's okay. But as she stood up, the knot in her stomach tightened. Something about this call, this mysterious woman, felt like a warning. What if this was the beginning of another storm? Gustavo exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. We'll figure this out, he said, his voice steadier now. I won't let anything hurt you or Ethan. I promise. But Isabella couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She had fought so hard to build a stable life for herself and her son. And now, just as things were starting to feel whole again, the past threatened to unravel it all. For the rest of the evening, the weight of uncertainty hung heavy between them, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows on the walls, shadows that hinted at the challenges still to come. I thought you'd never want to see us again. Isabella's voice cracked under the weight of her confession, her tears spilling freely now. The years of fear, guilt, and heartbreak seemed to unravel in an instant, leaving her exposed in front of the two people who mattered most. Gustavo sat still, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table. The shock and betrayal on his face were almost too painful to bear. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, it seemed as though he was struggling to find the right words, or any words at all. You should have told me, he whispered, his voice raw and laced with hurt. I deserve to know. Isabella shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I know I should have. But you were gone, Gustavo. And when you left, I didn't think you'd ever come back. I made a mistake. But I've tried so hard to do what's right for Ethan. Gustavo leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table as he buried his face in his hands. The weight of Sarah's revelation pressed heavily on him, as if the ground beneath his feet had crumbled. Everything he thought he knew, his relationship with Isabella, his bond with Ethan, felt like a fragile illusion shattered by a single truth. "I thought he was my son," Gustavo murmured, his voice barely audible. "I loved him like he was my own. And he loves you," Isabella whispered fiercely, reaching across the table again. "Gustavo, you are his father. You always will be. Biology doesn't change that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of conversation in the cafe swirled around them, but Isabella felt as if the three of them were trapped in a bubble, isolated from the world. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, as though regretting her decision to drop the bombshell. "I didn't come here to destroy your relationship with Ethan," Sarah said softly, her expression earnest. "I just thought you deserved the truth. Both of you." Gustavo exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of emotions too complicated to untangle in one night. "Why now?" he asked, his voice thick with frustration. "Why bring this up now? What do you want from us?" "I don't want anything," Sarah replied, her hands folded neatly on the table. "But Ethan deserves to know who his biological father is. Alex has a right to be part of his life too." The mention of Alex's name sent a fresh wave of bitterness crashing over Gustavo. His former best friend, someone he had trusted with everything, was suddenly entangled in the most personal part of his life. "No," Gustavo said, shaking his head with finality. "Ethan doesn't need to know anything about Alex. I'm his father. I've been here. I'm not going to let some stranger step in and disrupt his life." "Gustavo," Isabella began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "No, I don't care about biology. I don't care what happened back then." His voice wavered, but his resolve remained firm. "He's my son, and I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me." Isabella's heart swelled with emotion, relief, gratitude, and sadness all swirling together. She had feared this moment for so long, feared that the truth would break them beyond repair. But somehow, against all odds, Gustavo was still standing by her and Ethan's side. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but Gustavo shot her a look that silenced her. "Thank you for telling us the truth," he said, his voice cold but polite. "But Ethan doesn't need to know. Not now. Not ever." Sarah hesitated, then gave a small nod, recognizing that the decision was no longer hers to make. "I just hope you know what you're doing," she said quietly, rising from her chair. "Secrets have a way of coming out eventually." Without another word, she slipped out of the cafe, leaving Gustavo and Isabella alone with the storm she had stirred. The walk back to the apartment was silent, heavy with unspoken emotions. Ethan, oblivious to the turmoil, held Isabella's hand as they made their way home under the dim streetlights. His small chatter about dinosaurs and drawing competitions was a soothing reminder of the simple joys they had fought so hard to protect. When they reached the apartment, Gustavo lingered at the door, his hand on the doorknob. "I need some time to think," he said, his voice low. Isabella's heart ached at the vulnerability in his expression, but she nodded. "Take all the time you need," she whispered, knowing that this was the only way forward for both of them. Gustavo crouched to Ethan's level, brushing a hand through the boy's dark curls. "I love you, buddy," he said softly. "I'll always love you. You know that, right?" Ethan smiled, oblivious to the tension in the air. "I love you too, Dad." Gustavo's heart clenched at the word, Dad. It meant everything to him, more than any biological truth could ever take away. With one last look at Isabella, he stepped out into the night, leaving her standing in the doorway with Ethan by her side. She watched him disappear into the darkness, a lump rising in her throat. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges they hadn't yet begun to navigate. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but persistent hope that they might find a way through it all. Later that night, as Isabella tucked Ethan into bed, she pressed a kiss to his forehead, lingering for a moment as if trying to memorize the peace on his sleeping face. "No matter what happens, I will protect you," she thought silently. "I will keep our little world safe." In the quiet of the living room, Isabella sat alone on the couch, her mind spinning with everything that had unfolded. The past still clung to them like a shadow, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way to move forward. Together, she pulled her phone from her pocket, hesitating for a moment before typing a message to Gustavo. I know things are complicated, but I believe in us. Ethan needs you. And so do I. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. As she placed the phone on the coffee table, a quiet calm settled over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for Ethan's sake, and maybe even for herself, she was willing to try. A blended family? Gustavo scoffed, disbelief etched into his expression. You think we can just pretend this is normal? That I'll be fine sharing fatherhood with you after everything? Alex remained calm, his voice steady but firm. It's not about pretending, Gustavo. It's about doing what's best for Ethan. None of us can change the past, but we can make a choice now. We can put our pride aside and give him the love and stability he deserves. Gustavo clenched his fists, his jaw tight as he struggled to contain the whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. A blended family. It was a concept he never imagined facing. He had spent years building a life, only to find out that it was built on a lie. And now Alex, a man he had once called his best friend, was standing in his living room, offering to co-parent the child Gustavo had loved as his own. You don't get it, Gustavo muttered bitterly, his voice cracking under the weight of his pain. I've been there for Ethan. I've held him when he was scared, read him bedtime stories, stayed up all night when he was sick, and now, you want to come in and take that away from me? No one is taking anything away from you, Alex replied gently. You'll still be his father in every way that matters. But Ethan deserves to know the truth. Gustavo turned to Isabella, his eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. And what do you think? He demanded. Are you okay with this? With just rewriting everything? Isabella's heart ached as she looked between the two men. No, she whispered. I'm not okay with it. But I don't know what else to do. Her voice trembled as she continued. Ethan deserves to know the truth. But that doesn't mean you aren't his father, Gustavo. You are, because you've been there and you've loved him. Gustavo ran a hand down his face, his frustration evident. But it won't be the same. It will never be the same. No, Isabella agreed, her voice soft but resolute. But maybe it can still be good. Different but good. Gustavo fell silent, pacing the room in restless thought. How do you rebuild a life that's been shattered by betrayal? How do you share fatherhood with a man who was once your friend and now feels like a stranger? Ethan peeked around the corner, his small voice interrupting the tension like a cool breeze on a hot day. Mom, why is everyone mad? Isabella's heart sank as she saw her son standing there, clutching his toy dinosaur. His innocent eyes flicked between Gustavo, Alex, and her, confusion clouding his little face. No one's mad, sweetheart, Isabella said gently, crouching to his level. We're just talking about some grown-up stuff. Ethan frowned, not fully convinced. Are you still my dad? He asked, looking up at Gustavo with wide, anxious eyes. The question hit Gustavo like a punch to the chest. His throat tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. What do you say to a child who thinks the world of you, when the ground beneath your relationship has just shifted? Of course I am, Gustavo whispered, kneeling beside Ethan and pulling him into a tight hug. I'll always be your dad, buddy, no matter what. Ethan leaned into the embrace, his small arms wrapping tightly around Gustavo's neck. I love you, Dad, he murmured, his voice muffled against Gustavo's shoulder. Gustavo blinked back tears, holding Ethan as if the boy might slip through his fingers. This was what mattered, the love they shared, not the circumstances that threatened to unravel it. After a long pause, Gustavo stood, still holding Ethan's hand. He looked at Alex, his expression softer but no less guarded. If we're going to do this, he said slowly, it has to be about Ethan. No power struggles. No egos. Just what's best for him. Alex nodded, relief flashing in his eyes. Agreed. I just want to be part of his life. No more, no less. Isabella exhaled, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. It wouldn't be easy, navigating the complexities of co-parenting, building trust again. But they had made the first step. And for Ethan, it would be worth it. Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, the three adults sat in the living room, the tension between them easing into an uneasy truce. They spoke quietly, discussing schedules, boundaries, and how to explain things to Ethan over time. There were no perfect answers, only a shared determination to give the boy the love and stability he needed. Gustavo glanced at Isabella as the conversation wound down, his gaze filled with unspoken emotions. "I still need time," he murmured, "to figure out how to move forward." "With everything, I understand," Isabella replied softly, her heart heavy but hopeful. "But I'm glad you're here. And I'm grateful you're staying in Ethan's life." Gustavo gave a small nod, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. Trust would take time to rebuild, and forgiveness even longer. But for Ethan's sake, they would try. As Alex stood to leave, he extended a hand toward Gustavo. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "I know this isn't easy, but I appreciate you giving this a chance." Gustavo hesitated for a moment before clasping Alex's hand. "This is for Ethan," he said firmly. "Only for him." Alex smiled faintly and turned to Isabella. "I'll see you both soon. We'll figure this out one step at a time." After Alex left, silence settled over the apartment once more. Isabella and Gustavo remained seated, the enormity of the evening pressing down on them. Finally, Gustavo broke the silence. "It's going to take a while, but maybe we can find a way to make this work." Isabella nodded, her heart swelling with cautious hope. "One step at a time," she whispered. Gustavo gave her a tired but genuine smile. For Ethan," she echoed, her voice steady. In that moment, as the flickering candlelight cast soft shadows around the room, Isabella felt something unfamiliar but welcome, a glimmer of peace. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with moments of doubt and struggle. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were heading in the right direction. Together, the warmth of Ethan's laughter filled the room, wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. For a moment, the tension that had gripped them so tightly melted away, leaving only the purity of a child's joy. Isabella blinked back tears, her heart swelling as she watched Ethan wrap his little arms around both Gustavo and Alex. It was a sight she never imagined, one filled with both relief and the bittersweet realization that life rarely unfolded the way you expected. But sometimes, it could be even better. Gustavo pressed a kiss to Ethan's curls, closing his eyes as if anchoring himself in the moment. He had feared so much, losing Ethan, losing the family he had hoped to rebuild. But now, with his son giggling in his arms, he realized that family didn't have to look the way he once imagined. It only needed love. Alex ruffled Ethan's hair, his heart unexpectedly full. He had worried that his sudden entry into Ethan's life would cause disruption. Instead, this little boy, so open, so ready to love, had welcomed him without hesitation. "That's right, buddy," Gustavo said, his voice soft. "Double the hugs, double the love." Ethan beamed, squeezing them both tighter before turning to Isabella with a wide grin. "And mommy gets extra hugs too." Isabella laughed, her heart light for the first time in what felt like years. "Oh, I'll take as many hugs as you've got," she said, pulling Ethan into her arms. For a moment, the four of them sat together on the floor, the weight of the past lifting ever so slightly. They had a long way to go, complicated conversations, new routines, and lingering wounds to heal. But in this small, precious moment, they had everything that mattered: love, acceptance, and a shared hope for the future. As the night settled in and they tucked Ethan into bed, his tiny voice drifted through the darkness. "I love you, Mommy. I love you, Daddy. And I love you too, Alex." Gustavo and Alex exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with a shared sense of gratitude. "We love you too, buddy," Gustavo whispered, brushing a hand over Ethan's forehead. "Always," Alex added softly. Ethan yawned, his eyes fluttering shut, his small body finally relaxing into sleep. Isabella kissed his forehead, lingering for a moment. This was their chance, a chance to start over, not just as individuals but as a family. Back in the living room, the three adults sat quietly, the silence now comfortable rather than strained. The air between them felt different, lighter, filled with cautious optimism. Do you really think this will work? Gustavo asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low but free from the bitterness that had once colored his words. I think it can, Isabella replied, her tone gentle but firm. It won't be easy, but if we focus on Ethan, we can figure the rest out as we go. Alex nodded. We're all in this together now, and as long as we remember that, we'll make it work. Gustavo gave a small, thoughtful nod. For the first time, he felt a tentative sense of peace, fragile, but real. It wasn't the life he had envisioned, but maybe it could be something even more meaningful. I guess we really are a blended family, Gustavo said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Isabella smiled too, the weight in her chest easing just a little. Not conventional, she said with a chuckle, but filled with love. And that's what matters. Alex grinned. Here's to redefining family. They clinked their coffee mugs together in a quiet toast, the glow of the night's shared understanding settling over them. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for Ethan and for themselves, they were ready to take the first steps forward, together. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of their new reality, they began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found their way home. And we've reached the end of another beautiful story. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment saying, I liked it, so we can bring more videos like this one. Big hug, and see you in our next video.